All right, you guys, super fun project in the shop today. We're working on a 2019 Ford F150. We're putting a 6-inch lift with 35-inch tires. All right, so my process when I'm doing a major project like this, the first thing I like to do is I like to get everything laid out. I like to get a visual on it because that way you can kind of get a sense of what sort of a job you're in for here. Is this going to be more than you can possibly take on yourself, or if you're looking at it saying, well, you know what, I think I can handle this. This isn't too bad. Like if you can identify most all the components, get an idea of where they go, kind of gives you a sense of what kind of a job you're in for. So that's the first thing I like to do. Second thing, I like to read the instructions. Okay, don't be too much of a man about it. Read the instructions. You want to know every little bit because these can keep you from having to undo stuff you've already done. Do the steps in order. So that's the second thing I like to do. Read the instructions all the way through, and we're going to get into it. We're going to get this thing up in the air, and I'm going to show you how to do it step by step. But first, before we get into the video, we want to thank this video's sponsor. This video is sponsored by Keeps. Keeps is a revolutionary hair loss prevention formula. Real funny, guys. No, I thought we were going to be professional about this thing. All right, so the first thing we're going to want to do here is we want to go ahead and raise the vehicle up, get the wheels and tires off. I like to start on the front first because the front is by far going to be more complicated. The rear is very simple. So when you're fresh in the morning time or whenever you're getting started, when you still have good energy, it's best to start on the most complicated portion. That way, if you run into any snags or anything, you can kind of attack the problem logically, whereas if you're tired and spent, you kind of just fudge things and then you end up making a mistake. So I like to start on the front, get that done first, and then towards the end of the day, if that's where it goes, we'll do the rear. All right, let's get started. The kit comes with these new raised knuckles. You can see these new knuckles are very much longer than the stock units. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to disassemble this front suspension here, remove the knuckle assembly from the vehicle, swap everything over. I love working on new vehicles. Everything just comes apart like it's supposed to. Now, when you're removing a brake caliper, it is not a good idea to let it just hang from the hose itself. It can kink the hose, pinch it, cause some problems down the line. Can you do it and get away with it? Of course, I've seen it done many times before, but it is best practice to try to just hang it from somewhere on the suspension so that the weight of it is not hanging directly on the hose. Make sure to remove the wheel speed sensor from the hub before removing it, or you can just remove the entire thing, but a lot of times it's easier just to remove the sensor right here. That way you don't have to reroute the entire thing. It's generally going to be a 5mm Allen bolt that holds it in place. There you go. So these F-150s have a vacuum actuated hub here so you can engage and disengage your four-wheel drive. So it's a little bit different. I haven't done one of these before. I'll just kind of have to find my way through it. But it's just a little hub assembly right on the end of the axle shaft, and it looks like it comes apart fairly simply. So we'll just have to look that over and make sure we don't mess anything up. Looks like this little dust cap has to come off here. I believe there's a nut behind there. Let's pop it off. There we go, right there. Okay. All right, now we're going to go ahead and unbolt the hub assembly itself. So the hub itself, after you get the 4 bolts out of it, it should just pull straight out of the knuckle assembly. They're generally not in there super tight unless they've been in there for a long period of time, or if you live in an area where there's the rust belt, and if you do, I'm sorry for you. Just like that, slips right off. Now you can see here on this knuckle, or on this hub assembly, see that spline section right there? That engages into that spline section for the vacuum actuator for your hub. So that's something we need to make sure lines up properly when we slip everything back in. Don't just go ramrodding the thing in, tighten the bolts down. You're gonna pinch that up and it won't work anymore. So just make sure everything slides in. You'll feel it. When the teeth engage, it'll slip in. So just make sure you do that. All right, so you'll notice because this is a tapered fit in here, as I'm spinning this nut, the whole entire ball joint is spinning inside of here. What this means is I'm gonna have to throw another wrench on this small section down here to hold it in place as I'm loosening the nut, because these are nylock nuts, so they're designed to hold on as strong as possible. Kind of a pain in the butt, but on a newer vehicle, the trade-off is everything comes loose, but also these tapers are generally pretty loose in there. They haven't had a chance to solidify, kind of seize in place, so when you try to loose them, they almost immediately will spin. We'll take it off. So this upper control arm here is actually under some tension right now. The bushings actually give it some tension, so you can see it's actually pulling itself up out of the bore as I'm loosening it up. As soon as I get this all the way off, this thing's gonna go sprawling and jump all the way to the top. There we go. All right, so I've already got the nut loose on the bottom of the knuckle here. All I'm gonna do is give it a few taps right here, and this thing should pop right off. All right, maybe more than a few taps. All right, so here you can see the vacuum hub assembly that I was talking about. I think it just slides right off here. So there you go. All right, so next thing we're going to do is remove the upper bolt for the sway bar. And then I believe after that, it's going to be removing all of the bolts for the spring assembly. And then we're going to remove the lower control arm entirely. All right, so now it's time for the lower control arm to come off of there. Pay attention to the bolts that hold them on. They are slotted, so therefore they affect your alignment. You're not going to get it right. You're definitely going to need to get an alignment done after you put a lift kit on. Any kind of suspension work, you will need an alignment. However, you want to get it somewhat close so it's not flat out dangerous when you're driving it around. So try to make a look at where they are now, maybe make some marks with some whiteout or a paint pen or something like that, and that way you can at least get it somewhere in the vicinity when you put it all back together again. Also be aware that's probably going to happen. Nice. Also note the orientation of the bolts when you're taking them out, whether they go from this way or from this way. That way when you put it back together again, it's all similar. Or actually follow the instructions, we'll find out. Boom. Okay, so both sides are stripped down now. We're gonna raise the vehicle up, remove the front sway bar, and move on from there. Okay, next we're gonna have to remove this cross member right here, and then we're gonna move on to removing the front differential assembly, and also we have to remove our axle shafts as well. So right now we're looking to pull the front differential out of this unit. So you got 3 bolts to really look at here. The first one is right here. The second one is right, there you go, you can kind of see it peeking out right there. And the third one is the first bolt on here that looks like it's gonna be a real pain to get to. You can kind of see it up in there. See the back of it. Anyway, it goes all the way up inside here. That's where the bolt head is. So that one could be a little bit tricky, but we'll get after it. All right, so that was a little bit tricky to get this upper differential bolt out of there. The one thing I did find that was not listed in the instructions was basically the bolt as it's coming out this way fouls into the steering shaft. So I had to loosen the whole steering rack to drop out of the way enough so that the bolt could actually come out. So that's not listed in the instructions, but it was something I had to do. It's probably something you're gonna have to do as well. All right, I'm gonna do my best to get this differential out of here without dumping the diff fluid absolutely everywhere. There's a differential vent hose that you need to remove here, just on the top side. It's not bad, it just pops right off. It's not really held on by anything other than tension. Okay, well, that was probably the least fun part of this so far, trying to get that differential out of there. However, with the right angle of the dangle, it will indeed come out. You just gotta be creative with it. Again, everything is easier with the lift, and I have my trans jack available too to lower it down, so that helped out a lot, but you can get it if you fight with it enough, it'll twist out of there. Now, we get to cut the frame. So as you can see, you saw me cutting out the templates. I got them all installed on there, front and back. So you can use whatever you want to cut it. You know, reciprocating saw like a Sawzall. I'm going to use a cutoff wheel, either with the angle grinder or with my air-powered one. So we'll get to it. Woo, man, it's a bit of a battle there, but we got it cut. I cleaned up the edges a little bit, a little flap disc on there, just to keep it clean. Now the fun part, now we get to actually start putting things back together again. All right, so like I said, now we move on to the fun part. We get to put the new parts on. So I've got all the new differential brackets, and I went ahead and got the correct hardware. I got it all laid out here so we can put it on. Again, follow the instructions as well as you can, and pay attention again to the orientation of the bolts, whether they're going in this way or whether they're going in this way, because that does make a difference, especially on installation. Okay, so once we get that hardware in there, what we want to do is we want to snug the bolts up. We don't want to actually tighten them down yet. We want a little bit of movement, a little bit of play. That way, when we're reinstalling the differential, if we need to kind of jimmy it a little bit left to right, we can do that. And then once the differential is reinstalled, then we can tighten everything down fully. Okay, so we've got our front differential reinstalled. I have to say that, you know, after this piece is cut off over here, it just whoop, right up into place. So that's really nice. No more struggle with that. It just slips right up in there. Go ahead and install your bolts, all 3 of them. Run them in a few threads, but we're not tightening it down all the way just yet. Okay, so the front differential is back in. Now we're gonna move on to the front diff bracing. Also the sway bar drop brackets. Now also we don't want to forget about the fact that the differential has a vent tube. So the kit comes with this little extension setup so we can do that. So we'll get that installed. Front diff brace, sway bar drop brackets, we'll move on. All right, now it's time to install the rear cross member on there. I don't know about you guys, but especially when installing one of these independent style lifts, this is the really cool part, because I mean, look at this piece. It's all laser cut and welded and fancy. Oh, I love it. It looks great. So I think once you start putting those on the vehicle, then you can get really excited, because then you're making some really good progress. All right, now with this rear cross member installed, we can finally start tightening down all of our differential bolts, all the mount bolts, all of these things. We can go ahead and tighten all of that down. Now the next fun one, the front cross member. This is kind of the showpiece unit. You can see the RC on the front. This is a rough country lift. Let's go ahead and get this one installed. Okay, now that we have the new lower front and rear cross members in place, it's time to put the factory lower control arms back in place. Now the kit comes with these new set of eccentric bolts, so as you can tell, it's kind of off center there, so as you spin it around, it'll push your lower control arm in or out, and that'll help change your camber and caster and that sort of thing. So when you put these things in, you'll want to install them loosely to begin with. You do not want to tighten these things all the way down until the vehicle is sitting on its own weight. Well, first of all, it's gonna need to be changed anyway, because you'll need an alignment. But the reality is you don't want to tighten them down tight unless the vehicle is sitting on its own weight, because there's rubber bushings in the bottom of the lower control arms. And if you tighten them when the vehicle is not sitting on its weight, when it compresses, that rubber bushing is going to twist inside of there, so you don't want to do that. Well, that was a little bit annoying. The eccentric washers that came with the kit, they were such a tight interference fit that they would not actually fit all the way over the bolt. They would stop at the threads themselves. So I had to take my carbide and open them up just a touch. And now they slide on like they're supposed to. So just so you know, if you do get this kit, they might be so tight that you're gonna have to open them up just a touch to make them slide all the way on. That way we can get our lower control arm in place. Okay, now it's time to install the front driveline spacer. Just gives you a little bit of extra length, so you don't have to worry about slip yoke, because you go higher, it's going to extend. So they also provide some new longer hardware, but I'm going to go ahead and put a little bit of Loctite on here just to be safe. Okay, next up, we're going to install these brake line relocator brackets. I don't know, that's a fancy name for them. They're just like an extended piece of metal to drop the mount for the brake lines down just a little bit. So the only tricky bit about putting in these brake line extenders is that they tell you to kind of bend the brake line, but don't kink it, right? Easier said than done. So you just gotta go slow, be real careful, and kind of unbend it where the factory bent it. That way you can get enough extra distance for it to come all the way down to the bracket, and then you're good to go. So just go slow, you'll be all right. Okay, next step, we get to install our spacers on our spring assemblies for the front. So why are we going with spacers and not doing some gigantic king shocks on there? Well, the reality is, just like my own personal truck, we're not going to go out and do the Baja 1000 with these things. It is primarily an aesthetic thing that we're doing the lift kit on here. Spacers are going to work just fine, still give you the nice ride quality of the factory stuff. All right, so I did figure out a little bit of a trick when it comes to these spacers here. So it's kind of hard to tell like which side is going to be the top or the bottom side, but if you try to put it on one side, the holes are too small. It won't actually slide over the studs. However, you switch it around, slips right on. So you know that that's the side that actually goes here. For the top side here, they actually have these wheel studs. Well, let me show you here. Basically, it's just like a wheel stud in a car. So what that means is you're gonna have to draw it in. So it kind of just, it's a very, very tight interference fit, and then you'll have to draw it in with an impact or something similar. I'll show you here in just a moment. There we go. So now we just have to do the other two. Now we're ready to install. Now, initially I was trying to install these starting from the bottom and then going to the top, and that was not successful at all. So, turns out the best idea is to install the top first, and then you can slip the bottom in place. There we go. There we go. Ta-da! All right, you guys, we got the driver's side pretty much all the way back together again. And I think that's where I'm gonna leave it off for today because I am absolutely beat. But tomorrow I'll go over to the passenger side and I'll give you a bit more detail about putting all the front end stuff back together. And then we're gonna move on to the rear suspension. See you tomorrow. All right, you guys, we're back for day 2. I'm refreshed, I'm ready to go. I'm going to show you in more detail how to reassemble this front suspension. Okay, so the first thing we need to do here is reinstall the axle shaft on there, the axle half shaft. And just like on the driver's side, it's just a press fit. There is a little snap ring on there that you just need to push past it essentially so it clicks on. So it'll stop, but you give it a few little chunks and it'll pop in place. You'll see when I do it. Just like that. One thing that I learned from assembling the driver's side yesterday was I think it'd be better to partially assemble this knuckle, put the hub bearing in there and put the vacuum actuator on the back side. Get that all assembled first before I actually install the knuckle. I think that'll make it a little bit smoother for an install when I go to put the axle shaft in place. One thing to remember too, when you're installing your hub bearing, it looks the same pretty much from every angle, but on one of them, there's going to be the opening for the speed sensor hole, so make sure that goes to the top on the knuckle. Now we don't need to tighten these bolts all the way. We'll do that after everything is on the vehicle, so you have something to brace against. But we're just installing it loosely for right now. And now, the vacuum actuator, the nozzle for the vacuum itself, goes to the top of the spindle. So again, you should be able to, you can actually see it engage with the splines here. That's kind of nice. Yeah, that makes it easy. Should have done this yesterday. Cool, all right, it's time to put it on the car. So in my opinion, reinstalling or installing a knuckle can be one of the more difficult aspects just because it is a pretty heavy piece of steel to begin with. And it's fairly awkward to work with because it tends to flop around quite a bit. So my technique is to get the lower ball joint on there first and then throw a nut on it just to kind of hold it in place. And then you can continue to adjust from there. Yeah, this can be way nicer. Just gonna loosely install the nut for the axle shaft right now. So the big question is when you're installing this knuckle, okay, now you've got the lower ball joint on, how in the world are you going to get this upper ball joint all the way down to here to get it installed? Because even if you max out this upper arm as far as it'll go, it only comes down to about here. So what do we need to do? Well, we need to compress the entire suspension. Well, the only way to do that in this situation is to either stick a pull jack under it like a screw jack of something of that nature, which I kind of don't really like to do because it puts a lot of pressure on one corner of the vehicle. With it up in the air, it's a little bit scary. So the alternative is you put something down on the ground and then lower the vehicle down onto it, and that acts as though it's basically you're putting the vehicle weight on itself, and that compresses the lower control arm, gets this thing high enough where then you can force this down and install it. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, now that that's compressed, we'll see if we can't get this down far enough to go through. All you gotta do is get it far enough to get a nut on there. And there you go. Now, you can raise it back up and tighten everything down. Okay, so I've gone through and I've tightened down the upper ball joint, the lower ball joint, the hub bolts, the axle shaft bolt, the tie rod here. So now we're gonna move on to the dust shield, the rotor, put the brake caliper back on, make sure you put your speed sensor back in, get that bolted up to the knuckle here where it came off of. So yeah, we're just gonna continue some reassembly. Little quick tip for you here. A lot of times these brake rotors, they're not held on by anything other than the caliper kind of holding it in place. Then once the wheel is bolted on, then it's all flush. But it kind of sits all funny when you just set it on here, and so it can make it difficult to get the brake caliper back on. I usually like to take one of the lug nuts or something and just run it on there. Just like that, and it kind of really squares it all up, makes it a lot easier to get your brake caliper on. By the way, I know y'all have been making fun of me for my ridiculous, gas line fuel hose here holding up the brake caliper. I know, it's ridiculous. All my bungee cords are in my main box that I'm gonna go get later on, so you won't see this again. All right, so went ahead and got the caliper on, the rotor on, tightened the bolts for the brake line holder and also the speed sensor on there. So last thing on here is don't forget to put the little dust cap back on here. There we go. All right, on these lower alignment bolts, I'm gonna, again, it needs to have an alignment done, so these will come loose again. So just for getting it going, I'm gonna put it in basically a neutral position and tighten it up. Not crazy tight, but tight enough. Oh, Billy. Easy now. Back. So the last thing we need to do for our front suspension is to reinstall our sway bar here. All right, you did it. That's the front suspension done. Now look here. That's all that's left. You have the rear suspension. That's not so bad. Looks like we can handle that. Like I said, I like to do the more complicated thing at the beginning. Then you get towards the end and you're like, all right, I got this. This isn't so big of a deal. Now, one thing I would recommend before we move on is you've had most every bolt of that front suspension apart. And now that you've gone back together with it again, it's really good practice to go back through and double check all your bolts, make sure they're as tight as you want them to be, proper torque, all of that, because there's always a chance that you missed one. There's a lot of bolts in there. So go through it again. It's not gonna take you more than like 10 minutes. After all this time, you'd hate to drive this thing out of your driveway and just have a wheel fall off or something ridiculous. So go back through, double check all of your bolts. All right, so the first thing we're gonna do for our rear suspension is to install our drop bracket for our brake lines so that this can shift down. So let's go ahead and get that on there. So the next item is to remove the shock assemblies over here. Again, I like to break it up into a side, do a side at a time, especially if you don't have 2 pole jacks or 2 screw jacks on there. You can just lower the one side down. So that's what we're gonna do here. Okay, now we're gonna go ahead and pull off the U-bolts here, let the axle drop down so we can put in the new rear blocks. Pull out the original block because this is being a 6-inch lift kit, this gets replaced entirely with a new one. So the kit's pretty clear about this. When you put the new blocks in, the taller portion of the block goes towards the rear. This is an anti-wrap design for the rear axle because when you raise these things up, it can change the pinion angle enough to where when you really romp on it, the thing just starts bouncing up and down, which is obviously not a good thing. So this kind of tilts it a little bit and achieves your pinion angle closer back to factory again. New U-bolts on. Now another item they have to help with axle wrap is it comes with these little U-bolt guys that just bolt right around the leaf spring pack itself into the new brackets that we just installed. Time to reinstall the shock, and you just do so with the factory hardware. Or install the new shock, I should say. Well, I have to say, while I was expecting the rear to be easy, I was not expecting it to be that easy. That was very, very simple. All right, so this side's done. We're gonna move on over to the other side, get that wrapped up. Oops. All right, you guys, just like that, and you've done it. You've installed a 6-inch lift. All that's left is all the old parts that you won't be using anymore. All the new parts are on there. But really, what is a lift kit good for if you're not going to put some better wheels and tires on there? I'm going to show you those next. All right, so the customer went with some Toyo MT 35 1250 20s. And yeah, maybe it's not the most original choice, but these are the standard for a reason. They're awesome looking tires. They perform really well. They last a long time. I think they look great. These are the exact same wheel and tire size combo that I have on my full-size Ford. So hopefully on this half ton with a 6-inch lift, I won't have to do too much trimming or cutting of any sort of under shields or anything like that to make them work. But check these things out. I know wheels are always a subjective thing, but I think these look pretty darn good. Nice fuel wheel. Should fit on there real nicely. Let's slap them on. There we go. As you can tell, these wheels are dual patterns, so of course the first one I tried was the wrong one. Now I'm just gonna run these things on real lightly with this thing, and then once it's on the ground, we'll do the final torque. All right, we got to see this thing for the first time coming down on its own wheels. Extra slow for added suspense. All right, take a gander. Woo! Yeah, that looks good. All right. Here we go. Here's the owner. Let's see what he thinks. Am I allowed to look yet? All right, go ahead. What? Yeah! Woo! Oh my goodness. Dude. That is awesome. She's pretty now. That's the way they should come from the factory, right? I agree. I agree. Dude, that is so awesome. You wore the right shirt color and everything. I know, right? Yeah, what's funny is I bought this truck not knowing it matched my company shirts, and it and it did, so kind of worked out. Man, it looks so mean. My dad was like, "Why are you gonna lift your truck?" When I go home and show it to him, he's gonna be like, "Oh yeah, there you go. Now I know why you lift your truck." I'm gonna go to the house and show it to him. So there it is, 6-inch lift, 35s installed on a 2019 Ford F150. I think it looks amazing. You can tell me what you think down in the comments. Now, as far as the kit goes, review on that. It's a rough country kit. I have a rough country kit on my truck as well. They're a good company. They've been around for a long time. They've been doing this for a long time, so they know what to do and how to do it. So I thought it was a great kit. It was very, very complete. The instructions were very good, which is not something you usually find. All the hardware was accounted for. It was really straightforward. So obviously, can you do this kind of a lift install yourself on jack stands, something of that nature? Of course you can. Many people do it. It's been done. I've actually done it in the past too. It's not the easiest thing in the world. It's definitely going to take you longer than if you had a lift or other equipment like that, but you can get it done. There's nothing really that technical about what happened here. But can you get it done in a weekend? I don't know, that'd be kind of a push. I mean, I did it in a day and a half, essentially. Now, there was a lot of extra time in there for filming and stuff, but even so, if you're doing it yourself on jack stands, out in the street or in your driveway, it's gonna take a little while. So I don't think you should put yourself under that kind of pressure to just jam it together in a weekend. Maybe if you had a week, or maybe you can work on a weekend or after work during the week, that kind of thing. Give yourself a week, be generous. I know that can be difficult sometimes, but anyway, I think that would be the best solution, so you wouldn't really be putting yourself under the gun, then you're trying to rush to get it done, and that's when you make mistakes. So overall, amazing lift, amazing truck. That blue, oh, this is a beautiful truck, absolutely. But again, let me know what you guys think down in the comments, and also what else would you like to see me do?